Welcome back to the I Am More Than podcast. I'm your host, Jordan Wessel. I'm a former Miss Arizona USA professional model and founder of More Than Inc. I had the privilege of having someone I greatly respect on the podcast to have a candid conversation with me about social activism. I am determined to continue growing as an ally to the Black community, and I will continue bringing diverse voices on this platform to educate and empower our community to take action. Our guest sparked a movement on social media by calling out brands and influencers to demand diversity and inclusion both in the workplace and on our feeds. She uses her influence to amplify melanated voices while educating her following on the issues that are impacting her both personally and in her community. In this episode, we talk about motherhood, infertility, and some of the challenges she's experienced while being in an interracial marriage. We talk about the Black Lives Matter movement, politics, protests, diversity and inclusion in the influencer space, and mental health. She's one of the most well-spoken, knowledgeable, and personable people I've ever had the honor of having on this podcast. I have no doubt our conversation will enlighten, educate, and empower you. Please welcome Tiffany Turner-Moon. This episode is brought to you by Equilibria. I've been very open about my struggle with anxiety, and it has definitely been heightened in the pandemic. I've tried so many CBD companies throughout the years as a natural way to reduce my anxiety. I began using Equilibria in May, and I can definitely notice a difference in my overall anxiety. My headaches have been reduced, and I am sleeping so much better. The cool thing about Equilibria is they set you up with a dosage specialist to tailor their product specifically for you. Through one-on-one sessions, we were able to figure out a routine that worked best for my lifestyle and my specific needs. They're designed by women for women. We've teamed up to give 2 lucky winners their signature Brilliance box that includes their CBD daily drops, their soft gel, and their relief cream. Check out our Insta for more details on how you can enter. Now let's dive into the episode. Welcome to the I Am More Than podcast, Tiffany. I'm so excited to get to know you better and to finally have you on.
Me too. Thank you so much for having me. I was so excited when you reached out. I was like, yay!
Oh my God, girl. I literally was like dancing around in my room when you responded. I was stoked. When I discovered you, you were talking a lot about social activism, which I know is a huge part of your brand right now. And I also want to talk about all of the other aspects to you, which I know being a mom is your number one role. So let's kick off the podcast by talking about being a young mom. I heard in an interview you said you had your daughter at 20. Is that right?
Yeah, I had her at 20. Wow. It was 10 years later. It's still kind of a whirlwind for me. I had her when I was 20. I found out I was pregnant at 19. I was in pre-law at UConn. And I was a wreck. When I told my mom, she had an entire bottle of wine that night. The first thing out of her mouth when I said, I have to tell you something, she was like, just don't tell me you're pregnant. And I was like,
oh no.
And she was like, oh my God, Tiffany, like timing. And I was like, it's not like I planned it, Mom. Ironically, I told my mom I was completely freaking out. And then I went into preterm labor, I think it was about 4 months. And my doctors told me, like, your cervix is dilating. You can do a cerclage where they stitch you. Or he said you can go on bed rest in the hopes that the baby doesn't come. And I was like, you know what? Like, I'm devout Christian. If this is meant to be, this is meant to be. And she is a gift to me that God is giving back to me after losing my father at 17. And I'm just going to believe that this is going to work out. So I dropped out of school. I stopped working. I went on strict bed rest and I delivered her at 8 months. It was the best experience of my life. She has been such a gift. She is so wise. It's sometimes mind-boggling, but she's literally my best friend. Like, I love that kid so much. She's incredible.
And you really did grow up together then, because 20 is young, just figuring out yourself and now raising a daughter.
My daughter said the other day, she was like, we should have been sisters. And I was like, whoa, I'm your mom. Don't you forget
Hold up.
Don't forget it, sister. And she's like, no, I know, Mommy, but we're just so close. And I was like,
What was the relationship with your mom like after you delivered your daughter?
So my mom was like, she was still working, and she was like, when I retire, I'm not babysitting. I'm not doing anything. Like, you're on your own. And now my daughter is tied to the hip with my mom. She comes home to our home for like a week at a time, and then she'll go to my mom's house for 2 weeks at a time. So this is her week with me right now. She calls my mom and calls me mommy. It's so funny watching the two of them bond and their relationship grow. It's been incredible, but she truly, I believe, was a gift. I personally think for my patience and also my trust that that she would get here safely after I lost my dad. And she looks just like my father. Like, it's
Wow.
eerie. It's almost eerie how much she looks like my father. Yeah, it's incredible.
Wow. I just got chills.
Yeah.
And you
Yeah.
said you were on bed rest for how long?
Girl, from 4 months till 8 months until I delivered.
Oh,
Yeah. Yep.
wow.
Yep.
What is the mental component? I can't imagine what you were going through just mentally and emotionally during that time when you really don't have control over your own body.
It's rough. It's rough, especially because you have doctors. So backstory, I have polycystic ovarian syndrome. And so they told me that from a very young age, I knew that I had it since I think I was about 9 or 10. And they told me my chances of like getting pregnant were like 10%. And my chances of actually carrying to full term were less than that. Hence my issues with fertility now, my husband and I. And so for me, I was like, I don't even know if I'm going to be able to have a child again. And though I don't want to be a mom or pregnant at 19, like, the moment I heard her heartbeat, I was like, I want this child. And when I found out it was a girl, I was like, I named her. I was like, I want her. Like, she's mine. Like you are really forced to stop, and you can't do anything but think. All you have is time to think about what you're going to do, what you're not going to do. It's almost a mental prison because you don't know which way it's going to go. And my doctor's like, I just want to get you to the point where she's safe, that if she gets here preemie, she'll be okay. And I remember being in the room before they put me on strict bed rest, and they kept throwing around the word preterm labor and cerclage. And I kept saying cerclage. Like, I remember I read the book, What to Expect When Expecting. And I'm like, I just got to that chapter. Why are they mentioning a cerclage? And my mom, who's a nurse, when she got there, she heard them whispering cerclage. And my mom was finally like, what's going on? And they were like, we're sending her over straight to the hospital. And I said, well, can I go home and get clothes? And they said, no, we're going to send you straight to the hospital. We're going to put you on the high risk unit. You have to lay in Trendelenburg, which is where you lay with your head down and your feet up. I was in that position for 2 days. It was horrible. And your entire life is in limbo. So after that, when they were like, we're going to send you home, or you get the cerclage or you don't, but you're on bed rest, it's your choice. I firmly believe that it helped form my patience. It helped form my trust really in this entire experience and God's role in my life. And it taught me a lot about myself. It taught me my resilience, because there was a point that I didn't think I could do it. I was like, I can't do this. Like, I cannot lay in limbo for 4 months in hopes that this child will make it. And 10 years later, she is the absolute joy of my life. And it's something I have to kind of rely back on now that we're struggling to get pregnant, my husband and I, that we have this little blessing who's 10, who the doctor said probably wouldn't even make it.
Wow.
Yeah.
Girl,
Yeah.
you are the definition of resilience. That's, gosh. The one thing that I love and respect so much about you is that I feel like your online social presence is you. You talking about every single aspect of your life, about the struggles that you're going through with your husband, about social issues, about the relationship with your daughter. And I feel like you let people know you and know your heart, which makes people automatically connected to you, which is a really rare quality, especially through social media.
Oh, it's just so rare on social media. And I hate that. It sucks.
I do too.
I want
Yeah.
I want the authenticity. I don't want to be one of those people who you see them on social media and everything just looks beautifully curated and everything looks perfect. And then you find out on page 6 that their world is a complete wreck. I can still have some privacy to my life, but you guys should still feel like you're seeing kind of into it and understand who I am. And so that for me was a big part of the transition. And then really the social unrest kind of transitioned it more into kind of opening up more about the conversations that I have with my husband, who is white, with my daughter, who is half white, to make sure they understand all fronts, and also make sure that I understand all fronts, what they're feeling, and what I'm feeling.
Yeah. And I want to talk about that a little bit because I feel like I've learned so much, not just from your page, but also just doing a lot of my own self-education. And you had done a post about just the fact that you are an interracial marriage. And you had posted something about the Loving vs. Virginia back in 1967. And I remember learning about this and thinking like that was so long ago.
Yeah.
And something about that post clicked something in my brain where it was like, was what, 53 years ago?
Yeah.
That's not a long time.
No.
And I want to know, what has your experience been like even in 2020? Do you feel like there's still challenges that you're dealing with now, 53 years after the fact?
Oh my goodness, absolutely. Especially being in an interracial relationship, in a marriage rather, in the
Yeah.
South. I was raised up north, and I know not everything is perfect, and I know that, you know, racism and systemic racism is alive and well everywhere. But up north, I didn't see it as much as I do in the South. And my husband and I have gone to restaurants, and you know, the waiters act like they really don't even want to serve us. I mean, we've been stared at in public. Like it's I remember vividly, a couple weeks ago, Bella, Jesse, and I had gone to, I think it was to a Target. And Bella was like, that man, you know, there, he keeps looking at us and he keeps staring, and he's kind of frowning, and it's really making me uncomfortable. Her words verbatim. And I said, okay, well, you know, stand on the side of daddy, and, you know, we're fine. We're just running in to get something, and, you know, we'll be fine. And as we walk by, he kind of snickered. And I'm just like, you know, as an adult, that's something that I can handle. It still bothers me, but as a child, it sucks. And you would think 53 years later that things have changed. But I think, honestly, I feel like now it's really come to a head. And I think, though there aren't riots in the street and everybody can use the same bathroom, there's still systemic racism. There's still racism is still prevalent. And, you know, there are still communities that are underrepresented in the housing market and the educational sector. Though we think it was a long time ago, it really wasn't. Like, my mom is 63. She grew up in segregation. Like, she lived it. She remembers going to segregated schools. Ironically enough, her school, their high school reunion, it's still segregated. There will be a few, yes, there will be. And it's so funny because I remember we were living in Connecticut, and we came back for, I think, her 50th high school reunion or something like that. And, maybe not 50th, but I know it was a big one. And
Yeah.
I said, why are there only Black people, Mom? Like, where is everybody? And there were a few white people, but not that many. And she said, well, you know, when this happened, like, it was still segregated. They kind of still kept them separate. Even post segregation, they still kept the two classes celebrations separate. And she said, we've never changed it. I mean, some people might come, but I mean, it stayed that way. And I'm just like, what? And I was a teenager then, and I was like, this is wild. So imagine that, but now.
My mind is actually blown just because I feel like you hear about this, but once you actually know somebody that not only lived it, but is also having to relive it,
Yeah.
is painful. And I can't imagine what that feels like, watching your own parent have to talk about the struggles that she faced, 50 years ago, and is now reliving. What is that like? What are those conversations like with you and her?
It's interesting. You know, I remember getting really upset with her. I was in, I think I was in high school when Barack Obama ran for president. And my mom was like, a Black man will never be president. And I was like, yes, he is. And she was like, Tiffany, they will never elect a Black man. Like, and again, she grew up during segregation. She raised us in Connecticut, but she grew up in it all. And she was like, they will, like, the country will not elect a Black man into office. And the night that he was elected, my mom cried. She cried like a baby. Like, I could cry thinking about it now. She cried like a baby. And she was like, I can't believe this. But I think for a lot of people, they thought with that election that things would change. And honestly, I think things really got worse. Even in Connecticut, I remember they hung noose after he was elected in trees. It was horrible. It was horrible. And our conversations are, my mom is so welcoming. She's never seen race like with Bella. She's never seen race with Jesse, my husband. She's just like, you guys are family. They're family. Yeah. That's it. But the conversations are sometimes hard because she comes from an old school seen and not heard. And though she is very much an alpha female and very much stands up for stuff, sometimes she looks at me and she's like, Tiffany, you're talking like you're speaking out too much. Like you're making yourself a target. And I'm just like, Mom, my daughter is half white. Like she sat on my lap and cried and said, the people that are speaking out aren't speaking. What do you expect me to do? I can't just be quiet. So those conversations have been a little tough. Yeah. It's been a little tough. One of my uncles actually sent me I was going to say a DM, but he's not even on Instagram. He sent me a message after he saw me in the local news, and he was like, "I'm so proud of you, and I just want you to know, like, your ancestors are looking down at you, cheering." And that to me meant everything. Yeah, it meant everything because he grew up in segregation, and he knew that, like, you're putting your family and yourself on the line, but you know that it's the right thing to do.
It is the right thing to do. Do you ever get frustrated by the fact that you are the one that's having to educate people when in some sense we should already be educated? Like we shouldn't be in this position in 2020. Does it ever frustrate you that you have to be speaking up about these issues right now?
Sometimes it frustrates me, like on a whole, that I have to speak up. But then at the same time, I've had people reach out to me in my DMs of different races, of all nationalities, and say, I know you shouldn't have to do this, or I know it's not your job to educate me, but can I ask you something? And I always start my response out with, no, it is not my job, but as a Black woman, it would be remiss of me not to tell you my experiences personally and tell you things that I have experienced and dealt with. Because quite frankly, I think we've all figured out that the history books and our educations really have done us a disservice. Like these are things they haven't taught us in school. But at the same time, history books are very clinical. They're very surface level. They're very topical. They can't teach you the effects that separating the families during slavery, separating the man and away from the mother and the wife, how that still affects Black families today. They can't teach you what our ancestors felt, the stories and the emotions that they've passed down of toiling on land or, having to go back to these plantations where your ancestors lived. Like that's stuff that history books can't teach. So for me, I almost feel like I'm thankful for it. I'm thankful that I can, though I might not be able to teach you the history, I can teach you the emotion behind it. And sometimes, a lot of times, emotions will invoke more action than just a paragraph from a history book ever will.
Absolutely. And I have multiple questions after that. And I didn't even think about the fact that children in history classes right now, like you're saying, they're not getting the full story. They're not getting our actual history. And as your daughter's going through school, do you find yourself having to look at the history that she's learning and then also adding on a whole other element so she gets the full picture? What is that like?
Oh, 100%. She didn't even realize that it was illegal for a Black person and a white person to get married. She had no clue. And I fault the school system for that because I think that in itself is something, that seems very everyday for people to just be able to get married, but it's not, And so when I had to sit her down and tell her, no, the fact that your stepfather and I are married, that used to be illegal and I could have been arrested as could he. She was dumbfounded. She was like, wait, what? I knew there were slaves, but I thought, I thought you could still get married. And I said, no, Bella, I said slaves weren't even allowed to marry slaves. They had to marry in secret. That's why at a lot of Black weddings, you jumped the broom because that was how you signified that you were married, so that stuff. To me, it's just like you're robbing these kids of their education, really. I mean, I understand that a lot of people are embarrassed by the history and ashamed of the history, but I think that's where you're held captive when you allow that embarrassment and that shame of what all of our ancestors did and endured, to prohibit you from speaking out and sharing and making sure that history isn't repeated. History will 110% repeat itself if it is not discussed to its full extent. It will repeat itself. And I believe that a lot of the stuff that is happening now is because we haven't talked about it. I honestly had a friend of mine, and this is the first time I've actually even said anything about it. A very good friend of mine. She is white. She's one of my best friends. She said, I felt like, this should have, and I interrupted her and I said, this what? And she said, I felt like everything that's going on in the world, it should have been kept under the rug. Like it should have been just swept under the rug and stayed under the rug. And we shouldn't be dealing with it because now there's just complete chaos. And I said to her, I love you to pieces. Like you are literally the person that I see being my next child's godparent. But do you realize what is wrong with what you are saying? Do you realize that is part of the issue and why people are so upset now? Because you think it should be swept under the rug because ultimately it doesn't affect you. You're not dealing with it. So you don't want to talk about it. And she was like, oh my God, I'm so sorry. Like I never even thought about it like that. And I said, I know your heart. I know you didn't, but I need you to understand, like, if you are saying that, imagine who people who like really have hate in their heart for other people who just don't look like them. Imagine them saying that, but then the feelings that are behind it. Can you see how like that can cause strife and contentment? And she was like, oh, oh my, I'm so sorry. Sorry is not necessary. I don't want you to be sorry. I want you to be more careful. And I want you to understand and learn not just what media shows you, get to know some people and their stories.
Absolutely. And I think there's such a huge difference between understanding why you shouldn't believe something than by being embarrassed by saying something.
Correct.
Because I think so many people are so scared of saying or asking a stupid question, saying something stupid. They're afraid of this quote unquote cancel culture. But at the same time, wouldn't you rather ask a stupid question, grow and learn from it so it's ingrained in you as to why you don't speak that way? Why you don't view the world that way, And I think that's the barrier that I think so many people are fighting right now is it's like, we need to just have these unfiltered conversations so that growth can happen. So like you said, history doesn't repeat itself.
Correct. I recently saw something that said, like, knock it off with the cancel culture. And my immediate response was kind of like, I was upset. I was like, what do you mean knock it off? And then the guy explained it and he was like, it's one thing to cancel somebody who is repeatedly making, defamatory remarks or they're making racially fueled remarks. But he was like, it's a whole nother to cancel somebody because they made a mistake and they're trying to right their wrong. That's completely different. And I absolutely agree. And I think people are paralyzed by that fear that they will be canceled if they make a mistake. One mistake is completely different from, several in the same degree, and that's who you are. And the other thing is, my house, if my house is not completely in order, who am I to say I'm going to cancel yours? No.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I know you've had endless conversations with your daughter about what's going on, one in particular after George Floyd, which I do want to dive into. But as you were talking about the struggles that you guys have faced just being in an interracial relationship, I wonder how that is for your husband, having these conversations with his daughter. Is that difficult? Have you noticed that he struggles trying to have the same conversation with you? Is he worried about embarrassment almost, not because he did anything, but because people that look like him are doing something? What does that dynamic look like in your house?
Initially, when George Floyd happened, I said to him, we need to talk to Bella about this. And his response, I was kind of taken aback by his response. I expected him to kind of be like gun ho, like you're absolutely right. And he said to me, why? And I was like, what do you mean why? Like, what? Like, that's all I could say. I was like, what? And he was like, what is your why behind it? And I was like, help me understand what you're trying to say to me. And he was like,
Yeah.
I want to know your why. Do you want to talk to her because you're angry and you want her to be angry? Or do you want to talk to her because you want to educate her and make sure that she's aware when she steps foot out of this house? And I was like, whoa, Dr. Phil.
Yeah, I was just going to say, whew.
You're absolutely right. He was like, take a seat, calm down, get your emotions under control, because she is a child. And though she is intelligent, she will channel and feel what you feel. Make sure you are coming at her from the right space so that she doesn't ultimately get herself into something and God forbid something happened to her, but you want to make her aware, but you also don't want to make her fearful. And I said, okay, you're absolutely right. And so when we talked to her, I'm so thankful for him. Like he's an absolute godsend. It's incredible. But
he sounds like an amazing man.
He's incredible. He met Bella when she was 6 and they are inseparable. She calls him daddy. He is not her stepfather. Like absolutely not. I asked her the other day, I said, who's the favorite parent? And she was like, I don't have a favorite. And I was like, what? And she was like, love you both.
You're like, wait, hold up though.
Right. I was here 6 years before him, Bella. Before Daddy, you were my favorite, but now that Daddy's here, I don't have a favorite. And I was like, okay.
Like, fine, I guess that's fair.
Right. But he has been so hands-on. I never in a million years imagined that he would be comfortable to have these conversations about race. I really sometimes felt and thought that he would get upset or defensive. And it was my own, I think, insecurities. Like I was like, oh my God, like I'm married to a white man. I never really thought I was going to have these conversations that this deep, talking about a Black man being killed because he was Black. So I kind of thought like, he's going to get defensive. He's going to think like I'm just, this angry Black woman. And he was very good about telling Bella, mommy loves me. I'm white. Your grandmother is Black. Mommy doesn't see color. She is hurting. She's hurting for her community. She's hurting for you. But she also wants you to understand that, there will sometimes be people that do not like you for the color of your skin, or do not like you because you have slaves' blood running through your veins. And he's just been, he's been my rock through this entire thing. He's been so protective of me, of my emotions. He has told me, just cry, let it out. When Bella cries, he comes and just holds her. And he too has said, I will never, never understand, but still I stand. Like, so when I say, I have a post on my Instagram that I was like, I'm so thankful to have an ally in life. Literally, he is the definition of an ally. Like he's incredible. He's awesome.
That's the kind of relationship every single person needs. And I'm so glad that during this transition, really in your career and in your life, and then trying to face these new struggles of having conversations with your daughter, I'm so glad you have a supportive person that loves you both, no matter what, unconditionally. That's what a relationship's supposed to look like.
That's right, girl. It really is.
So I know you had the conversation with her about George Floyd, and didn't she say something pretty damning to you about why aren't the people speaking up that should be speaking up? And isn't that kind of what made you want to change your outlook on social media, or change how you were showing up on social media?
Ooh, girl. Oh, yeah.
Girl, I watched that interview and I was like, damn.
When she said it, I was like, oh gosh. So I knew the video was circulating. At this point, I think it was right before her birthday. So she hadn't turned 10 yet. She was 9, but she has a cell phone. She had an iPad, laptop. And I'm like, okay, I know she's always on her phone. She's going to see the video. And I was agonizing over it. And I was like, Jesse, like she cannot watch that video. Like she cannot watch a man's life be snuffed out. Like I can't. And he said, you're right, but we can't take her phone. Like, we can't police her, because then she's going to be like, what have I done wrong? Like, I'm a really good kid. And I was like, okay, all right, Dr. Phil, well, what do we do? And he's like, talk to her. You've always talked to her. Have a conversation with her. So I pulled her in the room and I said, hey, have you seen this video? And she said, no. And I said, do you know about it? And she said, yeah. And I said, have your friends seen it? And she said, yeah, a couple of them. And I said, okay, under no circumstances are you to watch the video. And she said, okay. And I said, no, Bella, this isn't like one of those times where I'm like, don't do it, Bella. And you do it. Like, this is a hard no. Like, I cannot explain to you how upset I will be if you watch this video. And she was like, okay, mom, I won't watch it. I promise. And I said, okay. I said, but I think we should talk. And she says, let's talk about racism. And I was like, okay, yes.
Okay, you're 9, but cool.
Right. Yes, it is, Vella. And as I began to talk to her about the video and what happened, and it was going to be on the news, and she cried. She laid on me and cried her heart out. And she said, this is wrong. I don't want to die because the color of my skin. That was like a gut punch. Like I could cry now thinking about it, like it was a gut punch for me. And I was like, oh gosh. And then she said, what about Ethan, who is my nephew? And I was like, oh my gosh. Okay, Bella. And then she sat on my lap and cried. And she said, I was rubbing her back and she said, this is wrong. This is wrong. The people who need to speak up are not speaking. And I was like, you know what, Bella, you're right. They're not. What the hell? And then I was like, have a seat. Because you're not speaking up. So what are you talking about? And from that point, I looked at her and I said, I promise you, from now on, I will speak up. I will start speaking out on my social media. I will talk about it with my friends. You will hear about this. I promise you. And from that point, like I went hard. From that day, I was like, you know what? Like, I don't care how small my following is. Like as an influencer, you are supposed to influence, and you influence when it's hard and when it's not. And that is the definition. And I hit the ground running. And I remember telling Bella when I was going to be interviewed by the news, and she went into her room and she was like, woo, I'm so proud of my mom. And she came back out and she looked at me and she was like, I just want you to know you're going to be in the history books. And then she walked back in her room and I was just like, doggone it, Bella, there goes my mascara. Like, come on.
Oh my God. Well, it sounds like you raised an incredible daughter.
No.
And that's all kudos to you. That's amazing. But you are. And I mean, were you surprised by how much attention you got by speaking out about it? What was that whole process like for you once you are being contacted by news stations and by hundreds of people?
Shocked. Completely shocked. I think there was like a day where I just didn't do anything. Like I couldn't pick up the phone. I was just like, I didn't like, babe, like I turned to my husband. I was like, babe, I didn't know it was going to be this much. And he was like, well, you lit the fire. Like you think you can stop now? And I was like, I can't. And I specifically, I was standing in my kitchen. I called my sister and I almost cried. I was like, I don't want all this attention. I was just trying to speak out. Like, I didn't know people were going to react like this. And I didn't know people were going to get behind me. And my sister said to me, do you want to lead the pack or do you want to be a part of the pack? And I said, excuse me, I'm an alpha female. I've always been an alpha. And she was like, then get in front of your pack. The pack's only going to get bigger and it's for a good cause. Lead the pack, Tiffany. This needs to be said. And I cried like a baby. Because I was like, what if I get it wrong? What if I say something wrong? What if people don't like me because I'm standing up for this? And I circled back looking at my daughter and I was like, you know what? My daughter shouldn't be afraid to be Black. She shouldn't be afraid for her mother. She shouldn't be afraid for her uncles and her brothers. I have to speak out. And it's, honestly, it's so rewarding because I feel like I don't want to be a household name. And I continue to say this. I just want this conversation to be in every household. I just want people to understand this isn't about politics. It's just about treating people like humans. That's it. That's it.
Why do you think that this is becoming so political? That's such a loaded question. But it's like, that's the one thing that is I think everybody can agree that this is a human right issue. Yeah. It's so confusing to me that it somehow has become so politicized that now suddenly you either think one way or the other.
Yeah.
And I don't have the answer. I've been looking for the answer and I don't know that anybody really has the answer.
I don't know if anybody really does. I know. I see a lot of people say, well, it's the Republicans. And then I see a lot of people say, well, it's the Democrats. Well, quite frankly, it's people on both sides of the aisle and down the middle that is making this a political picket. I mean, they're literally making it a sign, and it's either a sign that I support white supremacy or I support Black Lives Matter. And ironically, I had somebody in my DM ask me, can you honestly tell me what what Black Lives Matter has done for the betterment of the Black community? Can you really tell me? And this woman, she was white and she was married to a Black man. I went and looked on her page and I said to her, I want to ask you a question, honestly. Before I even answer this question, can you tell me what Black Lives Matter mean to you? Is it the corporation or is it the words? Because I think a lot of people get wrapped up in the corporation of Black Lives Matter when really, when I say Black Lives Matter, hashtag Black Lives Matter, hashtag BLM, I'm specifically talking about the fact that my life, my Black life, my Black ancestors, my Black forefathers, and the people that are to come, they matter. And, just so many people get tied up in, well, it's political and, it's about, it's the Democrats are using that to, push their agenda, and the Republicans are using that to push their agenda. I think there are supremacists who are using it to push their agenda. But I also think there are people within the Black community that might be using this also to push their agenda just to kind of make it more aggressive. I think it's on both sides, but it's not political. It comes down to a person's life, period. Like, that's it. It's basic human rights that honestly, Black people really weren't even included in when the Declaration of Independence was signed. They weren't talking about Black people. So, I mean, like, now that I'm actually thinking through it, when you think back to that piece of paper that really founded who we are, it was political then. It shouldn't be, but it was.
Wow.
Yeah, as I really think.
Damn, girl.
Yeah.
I never even thought about it like that, but you're right.
Until right.
I mean,
yeah,
it's ingrained in this country's history.
Yep.
And I think that's the confusing part and the damning part on both sides, is that we're realizing like, oh my God, it was set up this way and we have to destroy an entire system. And I'm noticing you were talking about how there's a lot of Black people who are angry right now.
Yeah.
Rightfully so. And it's frustrating that I'm seeing people try to hyper focus on that anger instead of seeing why they're angry. Like when the protests are happening, they want to talk about rioting and looting. Why do you think people are there to begin with?
Correct.
Because of their life. They're fighting for their life. And you're taking their anger to push the fact that they don't have that right to be angry, if that makes sense.
That does.
Do you think it's right for anybody to criticize how another person processes what's happening in our country?
I have always said that I don't agree with the looting. But then, and the riots, I agree with the peaceful protests. Mm-hmm. But I think back to Representative John Lewis, who was literally beaten within an inch of his life. And that was at a time when he was peacefully protesting. And so I think some people, honestly, I think some people who riot truly believe that their voices are heard. They're not heard anywhere else. That, they had a agreement essentially with the government. They had an agreement with the country. They went into a contract. I saw this thing that said Black people felt like they went into a contract and the contract was null and void. And because that contract was null and void and they're not being heard and when they're peaceful, that they're then going to resort to acting out. So no, I don't think it's fair for anybody to judge how someone processes pain or anger. But I think when you have two people yelling in the room, you lose the essence of what is being said. Period. You completely lose the essence of what is being said. And quite frankly, when there are two people yelling in the room, you both look like idiots. No one looks more intelligent than the other. You both look like idiots. I think a lot of people feel like their hands are tied and all they can do is riot and act out. I think there are a lot of people who are old school and think that you should dress up in your Sunday best and just quietly protest. But I think as long as you aren't destroying businesses and you're not killing someone, hurting someone, doing anything physical to someone, if you're protesting in the streets, you should be allowed to protest. Now we're in COVID now, so y'all need to wear masks if you're protesting.
Please end this. Please wear a mask.
Okay, slow the curve. But no, I don't think it's fair. I don't, and I think again that is it's being politicized. It's being used as a tactic.
Yep, it absolutely is. And I think it was really cool how you weren't afraid to call out big brands that weren't speaking up. Were you surprised when you got response from those brands, one? And are you happy with the response?
I was shocked when I got responses from those brands. I literally thought, little old me, they will not respond to me. But I know little old me has always been an alpha female. I've always had a mouth on me. And I've always been able to articulate my feelings and my thoughts pretty well. So I knew even as a Black female, I still could essentially do some damage or as John Lewis says, cause some good trouble. And so that was the plan. But I honestly was shocked. Like I was like, I know that I can finesse an email and I can very nicely write out my opinion. But when they actually responded to me, some of them even saying, I'm sorry, you're right. Can you give us some time to curate a statement? I was shocked. Now, fast forward to where we are now. No, I'm not satisfied. I think a lot of people, a lot of brands posted the black square and then ultimately went back to normal. I saw a lot of people saying feed fatigue. I saw that being shared, like thrown around. I have feed fatigue, and I saw a lot of influencers saying, going back to normal programming, brands kind of sprinkling in different ethnicities on their feed. And then a lot of them have gone back to only having white women on their feed. And so, no, I think some brands have learned from this. I think some brands are really doing a lot of internal work. But I think some brands did what they had to do to get past the moment. And I think they're going to continue to do that until, unfortunately, this happens again, because I think brands and people only really jumped on the bandwagon, for lack of a better term, because it was trending, unfortunately.
That's really hard to hear, because I completely agree with you.
Yeah.
I get it was a lot for people. That's a response I see. It was a lot. And this is also my livelihood. This is how I make money, is posting and brands and all. I get it. I understand the career field. But at the same time, what are you influencing?
Correct.
And you've done such a good job of calling out not only brands, but also influencers. And I remember you posting a video that some influencers said, like, hey, this was a tough pill to swallow, but I needed it. Have you seen that other influencers are reaching out to you almost for guidance or venting about the struggles that they're facing about trying to keep speaking up about it while keeping brand partnerships? Like, what are you seeing kind of behind the scenes over in the influencer world?
Yeah, I've seen a mixture of things. So I've had some influencers reach out to me and be upset and say, I felt like you were calling me out. And I'm kind of like, well, if the shoe fits, lace it up and wear it. And then I've had other influencers say exactly what you said. I had one verbatim say to me, that was a hard pill to swallow. I needed to hear that. You're right. I did want to go back to normal, and my normal, like what your normal is, should not be normal. So my normal will not be normal. I will continue to diversify my feed. And then I've had influencers say, well, hey, it's a business, and, I have a business to run, but I'm going to give part of my sales to a Black charity, or I'm going to do this for the month of June. But I think a lot of influencers in particular fail to realize that the month of June, I'm still Black. July, August, September, October, November, December. I'm still Black.
Ooh, girl.
Yeah, that for me, whenever people say they're going to do something for the month instead of making a long-term goal, which is why with the brands, I was like, I want to know your plan. Like, in 6 weeks, 6 months, and 6 years, because you can be talking a lot of change right now, and none of it comes to fruition. And that, I feel like, is what you are seeing, or I am seeing, with a lot of influencers. And I just feel like I am Black, and I implemented Melanin Monday, where I share Black businesses, Black content creators, Black history that you probably don't know about, that some of it that I didn't even know about, that I'm like, oh my gosh, let me share this. Why can't other influencers do that? Why I am Black, my community is being decimated, and I am the person who is still putting in work when this is no longer trending. That should not be okay. But to a lot of people, it is, because they say, well, this is my business. Well, this is my life. Let's weigh the two.
Girl, that was a complete mic drop moment. Wow. It's interesting to me that anybody can debate that.
Yeah. Oh no. Oh my gosh. I've had a ton of people in my DMs debate me on it. 110%.
I don't understand the logic there. Do you ever see some of those, and do they ever have compelling points, or is it all just, do you realize how foolish you sound right now?
Some of them have compelling points. Like when they say, this is how I support my family. And I understand that, I never want anybody to feel like they can't support their family, but you're supporting your family on a flawed system. And that's what I want them to understand. I understand you're supporting your family like this, but at some point you have to shake it up. At some point this is no longer going to work. Like, just like Instagram changes their algorithm, you should be changing your business plan to align with what is going on. And if it's Pride Month and you're supporting it, oh, great. If it's Black History Month and you're supporting it, great. But to me, those are two things that you should support and implement into your business year round. Like, sometimes I'm just like, I don't understand like why this is like not basic. Like, but then again, I think about what our history and what our country was built on, our belief system. I guess I get why it's not basic, and why people think like, oh, okay, well, it's okay to post a black square and say I care about this stuff, and then go back to normal,
Yeah. What can people do beyond social media to be an active ally?
I think have conversations. Educate yourself, but don't just educate yourself by reading books about the history. Read books that are written by Black authors, because I think then you're getting a version of the story that in history books, quite frankly, you're not getting. You're also supporting a Black business. Support Black businesses. I don't think I realized until recently that there are luxury brands that are Black owned. There are brands that are like the Louis Vuittons and the Gucci's that people can support. Protest. If you're not comfortable protesting, have a conversation at home. Do a quiet protest. If you're at a family gathering and somebody makes a racist remark, call them on it. You can pull them aside and do it quietly without embarrassing them, but call them on it. Call this stuff out, because you can't only be an ally on social media, but I also feel like you can't only be an ally off of social media. There should be a little bit of a balance of the two. If you're comfortable posting about Pride Month, if you're comfortable posting about a sale, you should be comfortable posting about civil rights and equality, period. That should be ingrained in who you are and your business and you as a person.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And how do you take care of your mental and emotional health during all of this? Because I have to think it's been a pretty trying time over the last few months for everything that you're working on. You're an advocate. You are up every single day on your social media, educating people, having conversations with people, responding. I'm sure that can get exhausting. How do you prioritize you?
In the beginning, I put everybody's needs before my own. My husband had to stop me, and he was like, if you do not take care of you, you are no good to anybody else. And he was like, I'm telling you, if we end up in the hospital, it is going to be a problem. You have to take care of you. And I was like, you're right, babe. And he was like, no, I'm tired of hearing you're right. Tiffany, you have bags under your eyes. You're not sleeping. Like, this is enough. You have take a break. And so he encouraged me. I fully believe in therapy. He encouraged me to call my therapist. I did. I unloaded completely on my therapist, felt 100 times better. I had to really learn to kind of detach from social media and put my phone down, which was very hard. Um, Watching the news was so difficult. It hasn't been as bad as it was, but I felt like every time I looked at the news, they were playing the footage from George Floyd. It was just Ahmaud Arbery. It was just a lot. So I had to learn to say no. I had to learn the power of saying no and saying enough. Like, I don't have mental capacity for anything else. And I had to learn that it was okay to raise my hand. I thought when this happened that I had to be the strong Black woman who helped everybody, who educated everybody. And my husband was like, you have to bend before you break. Verbatim, he told me, you have to bend before you break. And I did. And therapy, bubble baths. Sometimes like I would just say, hey, babe, do you mind if I just go in the room and close the door and just like lay in the dark? And he's like, yeah, I'll stay out here and I'll play my video games or something. Go do you. Like, you're good. Like, do what you have to do. Just really detaching.
I'm really glad you brought up therapy, because I think that people need to realize that what so many people are experiencing right now is traumatic. There's real trauma associated with seeing George Floyd's video replayed on the news 100 times a day. There's real trauma there. And I think that people need to not only use therapy as a resource basically any other day of the year, but I think especially right now, it's important to realize what you're consuming, what you're doing, what you're saying, and who you're talking to. And so I'm glad that therapy's been a really great resource for you to not only process these emotions, but also be able to know that your mental health is in check.
It's funny that you say that it's a trauma. I don't even think I realized that it was actually like traumatic until I watched the video a second time. I kept hearing about the video, and when I finally watched it, I had nightmares. I was petrified. We would be in the car, and honestly, like, being completely transparent, I was nervous prior to any time I was pulled over, even before this happened. But after it happened, I wouldn't go anywhere without my husband. I've just gotten to the point where I will drive. It's like just up the street without him. I was petrified. PTSD is a real thing. I think people think, well, you watched it on a video, like it can't affect you. Absolutely not. I'm just getting to the point where I can actually sleep through the night, and I'm still struggling.
Wow. And I'm trying to think back to like where I was even at during that time, that I remember saying, how the hell is this happening?
Right.
I don't understand that something like this could happen. And I thought it was a one-off, that this doesn't happen.
Yeah.
And I'm realizing that just because this one was caught on video doesn't mean that horrible things like this don't happen every day.
There you go. Yeah.
And I think people need to realize that that's when it comes to the Black Lives Matter movement, when it comes to topics of social injustice right now, we need to all understand that it's not one instance. It wasn't just because of George Floyd. People say that I hate how they bring up his background too. That, oh, well, he was a criminal at some point in his life. That's not okay at all. You don't bring up what somebody did in their past any other time for any other case. So it confuses me why people look at this movement or look at what happened with him and they can't understand why a movement was sparked because of it. Do you have an answer for somebody if they were to ask you, why was a movement started because of one man?
Yeah. Yeah. Because you know what? I've had people ask me, what started it? He was one person. And my response has always been and will continue to be, he's one of many. He is one of many. It was just caught on camera, period. Police officers are supposed to protect and serve. They are supposed to serve. They're supposed to protect you, not take your life. And I think back, honestly, to Dylan Roof and how he massacred people in a church, and the officers put him in a bulletproof vest to ensure that he was not killed when he went from the cop car into the precinct. They stopped him at Burger King and got him food because he hadn't eaten for a couple days. And as a human being, I feel for somebody who's, you did this heinous act and you're hiding out and you haven't eaten. But like, so you mean to tell me you can preserve his life and get him food, but deny a man oxygen for 8 minutes? Like, so when people are like, it was just one man, no, this is for Medgar Evers. This is for Malcolm X. This is for Emmett Till. Hell, this is for Harriet Tubman, and she wasn't even assassinated. This is for everyone who has died because they were Black, except this time it was caught on camera, and you have people in politics using this man's death to fuel their own campaigns, and on both sides. People are angry because this is what the Black community has been dealing with for centuries. I really suggest anyone who wonders the why or just wants to understand Black history, they should really visit the African American Museum in DC. I haven't gone, but I've heard that the Emmett Till exhibit, it brings you to your knees. And for those who don't know of Emmett Till, he was a child. He was 13 or 14, and he allegedly whistled at a white woman. And he was visiting from, I think, Chicago in the South. They kidnapped him from his aunt's house, I think. They tortured him. They cut his nose, cut his ear, and then they tied him to a cotton gin machine and threw him in the river with barbed wire. And it later on came out, the woman who said he had whistled at her, it later on came on her deathbed. She admitted that he didn't. So when people say like, he's one man, no, he is one of many. And that's the problem.
Wow. You're right. It is the problem. I think of Breonna Taylor. Why the hell are we still talking about the fact that her murderers are free? As a Black woman, do you feel like you are in danger around police officers? I know that's such a loaded question, but it infuriates me because I don't understand why people don't see that there is a difference with men and women.
There absolutely is. A couple things. I was 16 when I was pulled over by a police officer, and it has impacted how I've looked at officers ever since. And the officer was overzealous. He asked me had I been drinking, had I been smoking, and I was like, seriously? Like, he had no reason to pull us over, couldn't tell us why he pulled us over. I was driving my mom's BMW. He said, you don't look like Virginia. Well, no, I don't, but I have the same last name as her. You clearly see we live at the same address. And I remember them making us sit on the corner of the street, and we looked like criminals, like with our hands behind our back. 4 Black kids. One of the guys held his taser, and he looked at me like, I wish you would. And it was defining for me. And I talk about it more on my Instagram feed because that I absolutely have PTSD from that. But then I think about my daughter's father, her biological father. We had a really bad fight right before I moved from Connecticut. And when I say it was horrible. To the point when Bella got into kindergarten, she started kindergarten here in North Carolina. I remember that my dad was throwing stuff at my mom and screaming and yelling, and the books were flying and it hit her. And I was just like, oh my God, this is not something I want this child to remember. But I remember on that day, I called my mom and I was petrified. And I said, Mom, he's here. He's upset. He's flipping out. Bella's here. I don't know what to do. She said, call the police. When I say those officers showed up in force, but for me and not against me, I could cry literally thinking of it, because one of them held Bella for me, like while I waited for my mom to get there. And then the other guy just consoled me, like I was crying so much. And he said, listen, he said, sweetheart, sometimes my mom was moving to North Carolina that day. And I said, well, I don't want to go. I don't want to separate my daughter from her dad and her grandparents. And he said, I truly believe like this was a divine intervention. You need to take this for what it is. This isn't healthy. This isn't safe. Get your daughter and go. And that day we packed up and moved to North Carolina. So I try and remember like those officers, how they showed up in force for me, and how one held my daughter who was crying and I'm crying until my mom could get there to comfort us. but I'm still scared. When I think about stuff like that, I don't think all officers are bad, period. I do not. I think you have some bad apples. And unfortunately, when those bad apples surface, they make it worse for everybody else. But I'm still scared of those bad apples. I am literally still petrified to go anywhere. I am so scared to be pulled over. The last time I was pulled over with my husband and Bella in the car, a cop came on my side of the car and on his side. I was in the passenger side. They looked in the back seat. Bella was petrified. I don't want her to grow up in constant fear, and I don't want to be in constant fear that something is going to happen when we're in the car. And the officers were perfectly nice. They were like, are you guys good? We saw you guys were kind of swerving, and we said, yeah, we were trying to pull up the GPS. We're fine. They said, okay, license, registration. And they were wonderful, but it terrified me that they were coming on both sides of the car. It terrified me that they looked in the car, so I walk around scared. I walk around scared, and people have been very nasty to me and Jesse when we're out in public, aside from officers. It's horrible. Some people have been great. And some people have been very nasty. It's a mixture, and it's so frustrating.
It's so frustrating.
It is.
And I'm so sorry. It shouldn't be something that you even have to think about. And the fact that you think about it every day. Yeah. I'm so sorry. Why I want to keep having conversations like this, and why it's so important for me to bring you on the podcast. And I mean, I didn't even know all of this about you. And thank you for opening up and letting me get to know you so well. I think these conversations humanize everybody. And see that there is real emotions, real experiences behind these, that we need to just have simple conversations and just say, hey, tell me about what your experience has been like.
Yeah.
You don't lose anything by having a conversation like that, but you gain a lot.
You do. You gain a lot. I think, it's really perfectly said, having that conversation, because you don't know what somebody's struggling with. And then that's my issue with social media. Pictures are so perfectly curated that you think everybody's life is perfect. You don't know what somebody is struggling with. I think a lot of people would have never thought that Jesse and I deal with nasty remarks and nasty looks and comments. I think they would never think that my daughter, who goes to a prestigious private school, would be told by a classmate, I don't like you because of the color of your skin. And when I asked the school to address it, I was told no. And I asked to meet with the parents, and they said, no, we don't feel that that's necessary. And I think that is part of the reason I speak up and say stuff, because I know some people are too afraid to ask, and some people are too stubborn to ask. But I am too afraid to not talk and let it be known. And I'm too stubborn to not speak up and let somebody be able to say, I didn't know. You will not be able to say you didn't know if you are a follower of mine. You knew. You chose to continue as you were.
Absolutely. Social media has so many blessings associated with it, and it has so many curses associated with it. And I think you are taking your spot on the internet, and you are claiming it, and you are teaching the countless people that follow you. And just like your daughter said in the very beginning, like, you're going to go down in history. You're making some real waves, some real changes. And I know that there's some things that you struggle with behind the scenes. But I do want you to know that you're changing lives. You're changing conversations. You are changing the way that people are viewing an entire movement, because you have the courage to speak up, and you're powerful. And I feel so unbelievably blessed that you took the time to come on and even have this conversation with me. I just want you to know I'm in your corner, and I want to continue supporting you in every way that we can. So I want you to just let us know how everybody can find you. I know you're rebranding and coming out with a new website. So how can everybody look you up and fall in love with you?
So on Instagram, you can find me at Tiffany Turner Moon. And then my website, so excited to rebrand. It's going to be Tiffany, Tiffany, TurnerMoon.com. Yeah, there'll be resources on the blog for all things, everything that I talk about, but specifically there'll be a corner for things having to do with the Black community, how you can help, how you can support, and a plethora of information and resources that I hope help.
Oh, I'm sure they will, girl. It's coming from you. I'm sure it will be unbelievable. Well, thank you again for taking the time to come on the podcast, and know you always have a place here if you ever want to come back.
Thank you for having me. I really appreciate you, and I really appreciate you continuing this conversation. It really shows who you are. I truly, I mean that from my heart.
So there you have it. I hope you got just as much out of this episode as I did. Remember, we are doing a giveaway with Equilibria, so make sure you check out our Instagram for more details. And if you are interested in ordering anything from Equilibria, you can use my discount code Jordan Wessel for 15% off your order. Remember, you are so much more than whatever label's been placed on you. We'll see you next week.